Hello, everybody. I've got an album hot off the presses today to review. Viñao by Michael Burritt with Third Coast Percussion and Eastman Percussion Ensemble. It released July 25th. So this is by far the most recent project I have reviewed so far, and I'm excited to dive into it. This is an album I hope I'm going to be able to dive in depth on a few things for. I've been a part of a few masterclasses and such with Michael Burritt. I've visited Eastman as part of an audition. I obviously just recently reviewed a Third Coast Percussion album. I've played a ton of Viñao music at the University of Miami, and I also just heard a ton of different cons at the Great Plain Marimba competition. So I feel like my ears are really primed for this. Now, I could not find much press on this album, and I think that's because there's something a bit odd about this album that will come up a couple of times. As far as I can tell, most of the musical material on this album was recorded in 2015, which, stay with me here, 2015 was 10 years ago. I know that doesn't seem right. So yeah, that's a little bit odd. These are 10-year-old recordings, but I'm not reviewing this as if it's an album from 2015. I mean, it's being released in 2025. So that gives just a few disadvantages that we're going to have to cover a little bit. I mean, it's common for an album to be a couple of years behind, and then if you count COVID years, maybe we'll say this album is like 5 years behind. Really, the most press I could find about this was a post from Third Coast Percussion themselves. They're going to be featured on the Estudios de Frontera piece, and they posted a nice little retrospective since the 2015 recording session that I'll link in the description below. Here's the album artwork. You may notice that the top, I think it's like a mirrored image of two Michael Burritt Malatech Marimba models. That's the silhouette of marimba resonators we get at the top, which is very cool. That's a nice touch. And now let's dive into the album. I listened a little bit out of order because, well, I listened to the Burritt variations and the Kahn variations back to back because I just wanted to compare those. Michael Burritt is obviously one of the world's and has been one of the world's premier marimbists and marimba pedagogues, so I was very interested to hear his take on these pieces. So I'll just give the brief comments that popped out to me about each piece, but obviously we know what Burritt variations and Kahn variations sound like, so I'm going to just try to discuss both of them and discuss Burritt's approach to them as a whole. Both will have, a main theme and then like 7 variations of material. So for the Burritt variations, obviously we have Burritt himself playing the piece that he commissioned from Viñao. Around 1 minute and 30 seconds into this piece, I was about to make a comment, boy, this sounds just like Stress and Flow. Then I was like, no, it sounds just like Movement 4 of Book of Grooves. Then I was like, it's Viñao. He has his octatonic, polyrhythmic metric modulation style that can be very self-similar. But I do like in Burritt variations how around 3.5 minutes and continuing for about almost a third of the composition, the piece really does slow down a bit, gives things time to breathe, and allows for some delicate choices to shine through. Okay, this part really does sound like Book of Grooves Movement 4 though. The marimba on these Burritt variations, the sound is fantastic. I'm sure Burritt's own marimba has some truly incredible rosewood, and Malatechs and their wider and thinner bars, they can be difficult to play on and difficult to record correctly, but when you get it right, it is quite powerful. The theme of Kahn is much more iconic, which perhaps explains some of its popularity over the Burritt variations. In Kahn variations, the marimba sound is much different. I think more of a difference than just change of mallets would make, so I'm thinking this is a different recording session. I mean, it could be different places or the same place, but recording years apart, who knows, I don't know. Yeah, very interesting performance of Kahn, especially when viewed as a continuation of how the Burritt variations sounded. Very laid back and controlled, choosing a few moments to be aggressive and strong. Okay, so for both pieces, Burritt's approach to both pieces is honestly very laid back and patient. he's so beyond confident in the musical material that he lets things come to him rather than forcing his way through the rhythms. Perhaps things get a little lethargic at times, but I can really appreciate that approach, and I applaud him on such a commanding style of performance that very much sets it apart from every student and young professional version of Kahn that you're going to hear, which is going to be largely about maybe aggression or survival. And the Burritt variations are obviously completely in his element, another very commanding performance. Burritt Variations has some strength over Kahn in being a more patient and expressive piece, in my opinion. A weakness is that the variations are not as clearly defined. The material sounds much more homogeneous all the way through. Kahn has several variations that are obviously quite different. Both very difficult and virtuosic pieces. I enjoyed hearing Burritt play Burritt, and honestly I wish about half the people that played Kahn would play Burritt instead for some variety. Now, these are two great performances of Kahn and Burritt variations, but the thing is, we already have a really high quality recording of Michael Burritt playing the Burritt variations, and we have tons of recordings of Kahn from professionals. So, although I think I've laid out the ways in which his interpretations might have differed from those other professionals, which is certainly valuable, overall, this is just not a very intriguing venture, and I can only help but think that maybe this would have felt a little different 10 years ago. Now, let's get into the ensemble pieces. The first ensemble piece we're going to hear from Viñao and Burritt is Estudios de Fronteras. And here's another big thing. Estudios has 3 movements, at least it does now. It didn't in 2015. It only had the first movement and the third movement, which of course then were just movements 1 and 2. Since then, and I've actually played it as well since then, a second movement was inserted. So a slow movement was inserted, so now we have a longer, larger piece of fast, slow, fast. This project does not have that movement because it didn't exist in 2015. So that is unfortunate, to say the least. But let's get into the 2 movements we do have from Michael Burritt and Third Coast Percussion. So movement 1 starts out immediately. I'm thinking this is a couple clicks too slow to me, and I'm immediately a little bit worried that some things are going to sound lethargic. We'll talk more about that later. The drum sounds are way overbalanced at the top of this first movement. It sounds like they're actually peaking half the time. Tam Tam Scrape is super loud. But around 4 minutes, we get to a mellower section that sounds quite nice. But then around the 5-minute mark, we build back up into this really huge marimba solo, except this gets flubbed somehow, either in the mixing or just where the ensemble and Burritt felt the dynamic emphasis was. I pretty strongly feel that solo should be huge. Instead, it didn't sound like a choice was made. It just sounded like an awkward drop-off. Not like an intentional drop. It just felt kind of like a falling energy. Okay, yeah, so this first movement was a bit too slow. Why does this matter? Well, as the piece goes on, it just kept sounding a little labored and heavy. A bump in tempo helps you stay light and helps keep the momentum flowing. But what do I know about playing this piece? I mean, it's probably really hard. Yeah, thanks for indulging me there. Yeah, so my tempo prefers about 115 BPM. Their tempo to me hovered about 108. It's really not a huge change, but It just felt a little sluggish at times. Okay, so movement 2. Well, movement 2 for me does not exist. Movement 2 for them is movement 3 for me, Visita a la Frontera. This is a big change in terms of sound. We add a lot of samba elements. We start out with a great tom sound. I still feel like the mix is a little overwhelming here. My ears are a bit tired, but very appropriate energy that I was missing from movement 1. We are rocking, and it's great. I think this movement lends itself to the strength of having as close-knit of an ensemble as Third Coast play it. It really is off-kilter. It's very difficult, and they do a great job pulling off all the modulations, certainly more confidently than I was ever able to do it. Adding on to that Maletech instrument being really amazing when you get the recording right, which I mentioned in the Kahn and Burritt, if you don't get that recording balance right, it kind of sounds like you're slamming a 2x4 against a water main on the low notes. And we get a little bit of that here as Michael Burritt is rocking out on those low notes. They don't have the clarity they did for the Burritt variations, which was a really impressive and phenomenal sound. Great job to the tom player here. That part is a quasi-solo. And we're done with Estudios. I can feel clearly that I prefer having that movement in the middle, so I definitely think it's a bit of a shame that they weren't able to record that. Now we are moving on to probably Viñao's best piece of work, which is Water. Movement 1, Edge of a Tide. We have quite a treat here. On the YouTube playlist of this album, which I will link below, movements 1 and 3 of Water are actually live video sessions, and this is performed by a ridiculously star-studded Eastman cast. Andrea Vinay, Megan Arns, and Colleen Bernstein are all well-established and amazing players, so a lot of potential on this recording. These videos, you can also easily see, were produced in 2015, which the question I have, I can see on YouTube that we have a Burritt variations from 12 years ago from Michael Burritt. We have those videos from 2015. We have the Third Coast Percussion stuff from 2015. So the album was done by 2015. Why not publish it sooner? Anyways, so Water, in my opinion, is Viñao's best work. It is just good writing, and the addition of the piano is huge for spacing things out and really providing reinforcement of theme along with a cinematic quality to the entire work. Whether it's Reich Viñao or Seaborn from Garth Neustadter, or the Icarus Quartet, or my own album, piano with percussion is a great pairing. So this first movement constantly has rapidly swirling eddies that can be very difficult. Here they are performed very well. Congratulations to the whole ensemble. I like the xylophone sound they're getting. Overall, this mix is really nice. Mid-range marimba is maybe a bit lost, but that's to be expected. The bass end of the marimba could definitely be boosted. The end of this first movement is very sensitively performed and mixed, very celestial and impactful, really impressive. Movement 2 of Water, Through the Wild Rain, no video for this movement. After a mysterious opening, around a minute and a half, we get a very nice groove. There are a lot of similarities between this second movement of Water and what the new second movement of Estudios is like, a kind of sensuous tango feel that's always a lot of fun to play. This is well performed with clear recording quality, so a great recording to have of Water. If I'm finding something to criticize in the second movement, it's a little safe perhaps, not too many risks taken. We'll see if that comment holds up in the tumultuous third movement. Really good intensification as this movement goes on, and once again, I really like that xylophone sound. Okay, Todos los Rios el Rio. This is movement 3, and it is a barn burner. Let's see what happens. They start pretty steadily. This is a few clicks under where I might begin. This is another video, and I'd love to see more visual communication between the players, but everything is staying really tight, so obviously it's working out fine. The rhythmic modulations in this movement are positively brutal. The bass marimba part is really tough. Around 3.5 minutes, I was certainly hoping for some more drama. Everyone is a little heads down here, and there's no good sightline to the piano, so I don't think there's the confidence to really add a little bit of dynamic drama. It is very worth mentioning that this is a piece that heavily benefits from the old iPad and foot pedal combination for scores. This was 10 years ago, when that was not very popular or feasible or accessible. Today, the recording session would probably look different. This is a great recording of the piece, played well and clearly. I could keep track of the rhythms and motifs bouncing from place to place. If they could segment the recording in a way that let them really push in a few places and try out some more risky stuff, I think that would have made the whole piece burn brighter. But I mean, how far can you really push it? I mean, you can't expect. Roll it. Okay, I'm done. Congratulations to the Eastman Percussion Ensemble. That was a really great performance of Water. Okay, so since I listened a little bit out of order, we're already done. This album has a couple of things working against it. If it had been released in 2016, I think it would have been quite an event. But as it stands, you have everyone playing these pieces all the time. You've missed out on a new movement of a piece, and judging it against it from other percussive CDs from 2025, well, some of the recording tech is going to sound a little bit dated because it is. As good as Burritt is on the solo pieces, and he's incredible, again, there's nothing too daring about that because we've had recordings of him playing this stuff for years on YouTube, and people have used it for reference for years. Even the fact that it is an album of all Viñao may hurt it conceptually. This was an hour and 2 minutes of octatonic scales and metric modulations. It was a bit hard to get through. The execution is all there, perhaps aside from movement 1 of Estudios, so my congratulations to all the performers. Conceptually, the album is going to lose some heavy points from me, so my final rating for this album is 5 out of 10. Now remember, 5 out of 10 puts this as a perfectly satisfactory percussive release. I grade on a full 10-point scale. Have you played these pieces? Have you referenced Burritt's recordings before? How much Viñao have you listened to? Am I crazy for putting this as a 5? Why do you think this album waited so long to release? Ask me all those questions in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next week.